For those who don't know, in a nutshell, describe what this film is about.
This film is about a series of debates between two famous public intellectuals, Gore Vidal, who is a famous left-wing thinker, and a man named William F. Buckley, who in America was a very famous conservative thinker. And they had a series of televised debates on national television in 1968 that really kind of changed the idea of what argument could be on television. It was the first time American television really had people on who were diametrically opposed and who were willing to really let it fly. You know, before then, television was a very civil place, and this movie shows the moment when things got very uncivil.
Now, why did you make this film, and who did you make it for?
Well, I started as a journalist, and so did my partner, Robert Gordon. And, you know, I think we were big believers in the power of media. I think we love journalism. And this film just seemed like it seemed to say a lot about what we thought media could do for the good and where it could go wrong. In a way, it was kind of the ultimate cautionary tale about media gone wrong. And it was just fascinating. I mean, it was really a labor of love project. And, you know, I think we made it for ourselves, and we're just happy to see that audiences have been enjoying it too.
Oh, you say you made it for yourself, but I beg to differ, sir. You actually did want this movie to speak to the media culture today. What is it that you really want the film to say?
I want people to think about how we talk to each other. I feel like the pundit world we live in now, certainly in America, but I think in most Western countries, you know, it's become such an industry that we have hundreds of people that go on television professing to be experts, and we don't really know who they are. We don't know who they're shilling for. And in a way, you feel like you know what everybody's going to say, even with the sound turned down. So I think we wanted to just remind people that there was a time when you could have real individual thinkers on and give them space to have real discussions, you know, sometimes very high-minded and sometimes very low-minded. But that, I think, was it, just to have a discussion about how we can have some civil discourse in our culture.
It seems that the debates set an example, but television, as it often does, took the low road rather than the high road.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that, you know, television, it always kind of seeks a broadest common denominator, you know, the other term for which is ratings. And I think what's interesting, certainly in America, news started as very much a public service. When networks started, they saw the news departments as part of their duty, and it's since become the profit centers of networks. And I think one other dangerous thing about commentary, and now we get so much of it on television, is that it's cheap. And people don't have to send reporters around the world. They can just have people come on and argue. And, you know, what I've seen is that, you know, we have whole cable networks now in America that have kind of perfected the science of getting people to blow up angrily every 4 minutes and then go to a commercial. And, you know, I think it might be entertaining, but it's not very edifying.
Your film really reminds us that there is this prehistory of commentary, certainly in the United States. Brinkley, Ed Murrow, Walter Cronkite. You say in the film that television was the most respected news medium that people had access to. All that seems to be lost today. Do you believe that?
Absolutely. I mean, the people who kind of built the idea of what television news could be in America were very, very respected journalists, and they took their news very seriously. I think it's come such a long way, or it's descended such a long way since then, that it's sad, really. I mean, even worse than sad, it's dangerous. Because now we live in a world where both the right and the left have their own networks that preach to the converted. And the problem is not just disagreeing with opinion, but now we have people disagreeing about fact. And it's that kind of the decentralization of media has led people to be able to believe and live in a world of their own facts. And when we can't agree on facts, that's a slippery slope.
I think you're referring there to the issue, the culture of self-reinforcement, that you adopt a point of view, you listen to the station that reinforces your point of view, you go online and visit websites and Twitter feeds that also just reinforce your point of view, so you are continually reinforcing your own set of beliefs without exposure to any other opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's like you say on websites, we don't even think about it, but search engines like Google know what your political preferences are and will direct you to websites to basically reinforce your own beliefs. So you may not even realize that you're in an echo chamber, and that can be really, really dangerous.
What do you think of the encroachment of comedians into the news arena?
I think it's very important.
Okay.
I think it's not new. If you go back to Jonathan Swift or Mark Twain or even further back, the idea of satire as a way of getting at the real truths is ancient. And in a way now, I think it's never been more important, because with the veneer of humor, they're able to actually reveal truths without a specific agenda other than truth itself.
You guys are at pains to give a full account of both men in the film, but one guy does come off looking better than the other guy. Which one?
I think I would say William F. Buckley.
Ding! Correct.
Yeah, well, but again, we're not. They're two separate things. There's who's right historically, and that is a question we're not trying to answer. And I think Gore Vidal was an incredible thinker. In fact, my first job after university was working for him as a fact checker, and I had immense respect for him. I do, and his writings. But in terms of being a human, I think William Buckley actually is the more sympathetic character. And in a way, I think Gore would be fine with that, because Gore, he really kind of loathed sympathy. I mean, it was part of his persona. If you know much about Gore, he always eschewed any kind of warm feelings from anybody. Mm. And he would say, if you look underneath my cold, hard exterior, you'll find ice water in my veins. So I think he was very upfront that he didn't want to be a huggy, likable character. He wanted to be cold as ice, and he was. But what I realized in making the film is that Buckley was maybe the more human, and Gore maybe was the more prescient.
One also gets the sense from the film that Buckley was the one motivated by a genuine desire to engage ideas. He edited the National Review, which was an incredibly powerful magazine. He also was the host of Firing Line, where he would have people with opposing views come on, and even though he often did that so he could shred them, he did obviously want to air the other side of the debate. So he seemed more interested in engaging in ideas, whereas Vidal seems to have been motivated, I guess to some degree, almost by just antipathy, by envy even.
I mean, I think Gore was a controversialist. And I would say that Gore was very interested in ideas. He was less interested in people. And Buckley is the one that made a very conscious decision to not just be a man of letters, but to actually try and build a political movement that could get people elected. And he succeeded in that. So in a way, I think one takeaway you could have from the film is that Gore won the debates, but that Buckley won the war, because Buckley is the one that ended up as the kingmaker. He was, hugely responsible for Ronald Reagan's election in America. But even that, I think, is a little simplistic, because I think the jury's still out. I mean, it's interesting now, 50 years later, seeing the things that Gore Vidal was talking about in the 60s, about gay politics, about the legalization of drugs, about transgender politics. Just now, those things are starting to really happen. So maybe Buckley was 20 years ahead of his time, and maybe Gore was 50 years ahead of his time.
Got to ask you just about the key moment, of course, that you focused on quite rightly in Debate 9, where Buckley basically loses his cool. And that seems to be the defining moment of the debates, where he felt he'd lost because he'd lost his composure, and Gore felt he'd won because he'd needled his opponent so much. I'm wondering, Morgan, whether it's that moment of sensationalism that TV culture picked up on and then ran with it. That's what they wanted to see. Not the rest of the debates, which, where there was an exchange of ideas, but that particular moment of anger and of extreme emotion.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a quote in our film from the former head of NBC News saying, "Argument is sugar and the rest of us are flies." And there is this moment where Buckley loses it, and Gore needles Buckley by calling him a crypto-Nazi, and Buckley comes back and calls him a queer and threatens to punch him. And it kind of descends from there. By the rules of debate, composure is always to be upheld, and Gore, I think, felt that he won the debate in that moment. But I think we all lost in that moment, too, because what television took away from it was, geez, people like to watch this stuff.
It was like a victory for dirty tricks.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and actually, initially, when it happened, in the moment, the network was horrified. To them, it had gotten out of control. When the ratings came in, they sang a different song.
Did Gore Vidal ever subject himself, as William F. Buckley did, to the committee of Laugh-In?
Yes, they both went on Laugh-In. Both of them went on. I mean, and famously, Richard Nixon went on that show, too. It was such a popular show. Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing that you don't get anymore, is that people like Vidal and Buckley, these intellectuals, would not only go on talk shows, they'd go on game shows. And they'd go on comedy shows and vaudeville shows. So I just can't imagine an era today where you would have real intellectuals like that going on What's My Line or Jeopardy or whatever game show it might be on.
Given how timely this film is, do you see any signs of improvement in the current media culture?
The thing I'll say is most people in media, and many of them are friends, and I came from that world, they know what the score is. They're not dumb people, and they all got into media for the most part for the right reasons. To them, I think they more feel the pressure of politics and of the corporate overlords of all of these networks. And so, I think that people know what's right. What I'm hoping for is that somebody's going to be able to kind of do it right. There's some wonderful foreign news services, and I read foreign press as well. And in the States, we have people doing good media, things like public television or national public radio. But those things are kind of dwarfed by these giant corporate networks that really are just about trying to further political agendas. And I'm hoping that maybe a third option emerges where we can have kind of a real substantive debate, because I don't need to listen to people that agree with me all the time. As long as we're having real discourse, and I recognize that somebody I disagree with is not the enemy, is not Hitler, then I think that's better for all of us. I think we all need to be a little more open-minded.